Hi, welcome you all. I'm Benjamin Broersma from the Dutch Internet Standards platform, better known for Internet.nl. I was supposed to be here with Gerben Klein-Balting, but unfortunately he was unable to make it due to personal circumstances. So who are we? Well, the Dutch Internet Standard Platform is the organization behind the test tool Internet.nl. And we are a public-private cooperation from parties from the internet community like RIPE NCC, the Internet Society, which gave us our Internet.nl nice domain name, the SCDN of the .nl TLD, which does the DNS for us, and the government, so the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Policy, the Dutch National Cybersecurity Center, and the Dutch Standardization Forum, and some other associations. So we were founded in 2015, and our goal is to jointly increase the use of modern internet standards to make the internet more accessible, safer, and more reliable for everyone. And the rationale in 2015 was, well, the incentive is necessary because the adoption is faltering due to market failure, and the adoption of multiple standards in the Netherlands is lagging behind various surrounding countries. This market failure was researched by the Central Planning Bureau of the Netherlands, and the causes of this market failure were the asymmetrical information. So how do you identify reliable market partners which implement these standards correctly, and coordination failure, how to get a safer internet standards adopted, because of course there are multiple parties involved there. And there's also a first mover disadvantage. If you are the only one who implements certain standards, for example, DNSSEC validation, well, you end up with consumers which might say, well, why isn't this working? Well, because you actually comply to standards. So our product organization, we have the Internet Standards Platform, and below that is the product team, which I'm a member of. And we have two steering committees, one for everything related to Internet.nl. So actually that's everything with ends on Internet.nl. It's our website, it's our API, it's our dashboard, and our question center, which is questions at Internet.nl. We have the communications, external appearances. We have a toolbox with how-tos for how to implement these standards correctly. And we did some zero measurements for the .nl TLD. We also have a steering committee for the Secure Email Coalition. That's a group of a lot of organizations who want to improve on email standards. And we organize meetings for our platform members, for the Secure Email Coalition, and for API users. Last year we went to, for example, the One Conference, the Internet Governance Forum. We also applied for to do that this year. And we have quite a network of government, business, science, international, of organizations we collaborate with. So what do we actually do? Well, we promote modern internet standards. Which standards are those? Well, IPv6, we want modern addresses for further growth of the internet. DNSSEC, we want signed domains for the integrity of the domain data. HTTPS, secure website connection. We also test for security headers and security TXT. We also want anti-mail spoofing, so we check for DMARC, DKIM, and SPF, and the correct settings of those. And secure email connection, so start TLS and DANE, and routing security, although it only prevents, of course, a very limited amount of route hijacks. And last year, our PKI was added in collaboration with the NCC of the Netherlands. And the security TXT was implemented together with DTC, the Digital Trust Center of Economic Affairs of the Netherlands. So we have Internet.nl. We call that our single scan version because you enter one domain at a time. It tries to be transparent in what it shows you and gives you guidance in how to configure some settings correctly. We have Hall of Fame. If you score 100%, you can do that for the web test. You can do that for the email test. And if you are in both, we will also put you in the Champion Hall of Fame. We also have a Hall of Fame for hosters, which themselves comply and let their clients comply to be 100%. And our test baseline is based on the internet standards of the comply or explain list of the Dutch Standardization Forum, the security advices of the Dutch NCSC, and the relevant RFCs of IETF. And last year in 2022, we almost did 700,000 tests. Well, how does that look like? We have multiple tests. We have a website test, which mainly checks for the web standards. We have an email test, which does the email part, and we have a connection test, so you can test your own connection if it's IPv6 compliant. And we mainly score that on a percentage. And if you score 100%, you comply with all these main tests. But for every test, we also have a subtest, multiple subtests, and you can click through that, and even those subtests, you can expand and see the exact configuration of your servers on IPv4, on IPv6, because sometimes those servers differ in settings. And will give you hints on how to improve. So we also have the Hall of Fame of hosters. If a hoster is scoring 100% on their own website and on their own email domain, and let their clients also be able to score 100%, well, if they ask us, we will put them on this list also to promote further growth, because we also get users who ask us like which provider should I take? Well, we have a list for that. We also have the API in the dashboard. We have an API for bulk testing, which is JSON REST API. And we did almost 3.5 million tests last year. And well, we have a overall testing where you can do the bulk domain, but we also have the detailed domain details. But most CISOs and CEOs, they want CIOs, they want a dashboard. So we also have a GUI for this API, and you can add bulk domains on that, and it will test them monthly or twice a month. And you will see, you can track the changes over time of the internet standards. So maybe something is changing on some of your domain portfolio. And you can see the adoption statistics of all these separate standards. And you can export them on a spreadsheet. We also have the Internet.nl toolbox, which is basically our GitHub README page. And there are lots of how-tos for DKIM, Dane, and then also very specific, like how should I configure Dane correctly on my postfix or on my XIM, and how should my SPF or MX record look like on my park domain name. So it will advise you to put a null MX and stuff like that. And we will also link to interesting external sources there. So all our code is open source, and you can collaborate on that. It's on GitHub. Something is wrong with my clicker. And it's reused by several other countries at the moment. Still something wrong with my clicker. It's used at the moment by Australia, by Denmark and Brazil, and some other countries like Portugal and Singapore. They also have a similar testing service, and they took quite some inspiration from Internet.nl. And actually, there at the moment there are some other countries who are showing interest, but at the moment it's a bit hard to set up the code. We are improving on that. So for the future, we're implementing some new to test some new standards and to test more details. So we are expanding on existing tests, for example, the testing DNSSEC settings. And we also see quite some specific DNS failures we want to give back to the user more explicitly. We're working on an interactive email test because now at the moment our email test is passive, so we only check the MX server. But we also want to test the sending server and the standards if you can actually send to internationalized domain names or internationalized email addresses, etc. We want to test the presence of the CAA records. That's a record to limit, to restrict the CAs you can use for your TLS certificates. And we want to do RPKI validation in the connection test. So we have the connection test for your own ISP, and we're looking into combining multiple RPKI validations. For example, of Cloudflare and then NL Net Labs, they have validations for that. To combine them all together, because we see at RPKI, it really depends on the route you're taking, if it's filtered. So if we combine more, we might get a better view. But our main effort at the moment is simplifying the installation, primarily based on Docker containerization. Yeah, and if you want more, there are also people here presenting who wanted to have some standards adopted by us. Well, submit them in our GitHub, and we will discuss them in our steering group to see if we can implement them. We're also working with the Statistical Office of the Netherlands, CBS, and since 2020 they're doing a cybersecurity monitor, and part of that is they're investigating the average Internet.nl scores of companies every year. And actually, we see that companies score a lot lower than the Dutch governmental sites. So companies at the moment score like 65% of all the internet standards, and the government scores quite a bit higher. So we see more than a 20% difference. These percentages are based on the amount of subtests you score correct on. So it's not really scientifically, but we see the companies are lacking in these standards. So since there are quite some companies here, my thing is, modern internet standards keep our internet open, free, and secure. So let's use them. And also for every one of you, go to Internet.nl and fill in your own email address or your domain name, and see actually which standards at the moment are correctly and not so correctly implemented. And every time we do this on somebody who didn't done this before, they're every time they see like configuration errors in their setup of DNS or other stuff. So with that, I want to conclude. If you want a dashboard or API access, currently we can only do that for a non-profit. If you are a non-profit, you can send us an email. And for everyone else, we're working on the container version, so it will be easy to host an instance of yourself pretty soon, so you can test your own customers or your own internal network with that. And if you actually score a double 100% on your email and your website test, then you can send us an email and we will send you a t-shirt, a nice t-shirt of us, and a mug for your coffee. So follow us on Mastodon, LinkedIn, and or Twitter, and please fill in your own domain name on Internet.nl. Are there any questions?
I can also shout. Martin, why don't you go and I slowly. Whoa, what about microphone stand?
It was working.
Wow, it works if you turn it on.
Peter, you're first.
Thank you. So that was the threshold for participating in the discussion. Peter Koch-Dienig. Thanks for that presentation. And I know this is a long-standing effort that has developed over time, and it's really good to see cover it more and more. And I also think that having a view of the population and the development and the deployment status is very interesting. What made me go to the microphone is that a couple of times you mentioned the correctness of the standards or implementation, and then you also talked about configuration errors. Now, we had a discussion yesterday, and the gentleman right next to me mentioned that there for a couple of these standard configuration options where reasonable people can come to different conclusions, and not all of the advice would apply across the board. So my question would be, who decides, in your case, who decides what is correct? And how do you deal with competing schools of thought? And also with more complexity and more complex standards or protocols, I should say, rather than standards, protocols that you evaluate, differently good options might actually flourish and develop in different directions. So how are you dealing with that inherent ambiguity? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. It's a very good one. We try to stick to RFC recommendations. So part of that we adopt. But then we also have the internet or the standardization forum, which gives advices in the Netherlands how to implement or set certain things, and the Dutch NCC. So we try to stick to the formal settings they recommend, and not invent it on our own. And if there's discussions, we do that in the platform or with the steering committee. But indeed, there are multiple ways to have settings or have your configurations. And it's a very valid point. But we try to stick to common recommendations or guidelines set up by, for example, the Dutch NCC.
Okay, thank you.
Hi there, Martin Botterman. Nice to meet you again. Thanks for the excellent work that you do and the team does. And I know Gerben would have told more about the platform, which is really a multi-stakeholder gathering to talk about what's important, and you're serving that. My question is specifically about the code. It's been available for a long time, and it's been attractive for a long time. When do you think it will be easier to implement? So you indicated it will happen. What is the change that will happen, and by when do you expect this to be easier than it has been so far?
The setup in the containerization, yes. We'll expect to go live with that the end of this year. I have it working on my computer at home, and I'm not a developer of Internet.nl. But I'm being able to run it and patch it at the moment. And without the Docker setup, I wouldn't have been able to patch the code, I think. But now I can just run it and test it. And this is also, for example, we have interest from organizations in Spain to run this. Yeah, this is one of the things they are waiting for, to have an easy setup. Yes.
Excellent, because for sure Internet.nl already gives the opportunity to test. But it's so good to have it in the local settings, and I can just testify that in India and Africa there's a big interest too.
Yes.
Thanks.
Neil O'Reilly, this time wearing my Tolerant Networks Limited hat. It's a small registrar and research and development campus company in Dublin. And we use these kind of dashboards from time to time, and I'm very enthusiastic about them. This one and the other one that deserves mention is Zone Master from AFNIC and IIS. And when trying to use these, there often appears a gap between the helpful messages that come on the dashboard and the toolbox resources that might be linked to those messages. The toolbox is there, the messages are there. It would be nice to have maybe an information button beside the message saying, perhaps you need to look at this part of the toolbox, because finding the toolbox entries can almost be a bigger challenge than setting up your configuration in the first place.
Yes, we're trying to improve on that. So we have the technical view. If you go back to the subtest, and in those subtests, if we see we get a lot of questions, for example, about the content security policy, we got quite some questions. So we now have a detailed split out of especially what subtest case in your CSP is not so preferable. And we also try to link to different toolboxes, but that's mainly from our toolbox. Because yeah, there are lots of links to implement these standards, and we try to gather them on our GitHub toolbox. Yes.
Good. So I'm looking forward to seeing where you take that.
Okay, and as last thing, there's an online question which isn't actually a question. It's Carsten Schaeffner, I think, not a question but a comment. Thomas Fairbeck NL has set up an email tester at email-security-scans.org. Maybe these two efforts can be combined or linked to each other. In fact, Thomas is with Dutch University, but I have forgotten which one.
We recently talked with him about implementing this on Internet.nl, because we also worked on code previously and we had some half setup, but never put it in production. And this code really looks promising. So we probably will integrate this or part of this in our code base. Yes.
Great. Thank you.